Hello, and welcome to Two Crones and a Microphone. This is our interview with the Crones series part 2 with Dee Golas, A Challenge to Fix Reality. I am Sally.
And I am Betty.
And I am Dee.
As cultural midwives, our podcast offers guidance and teaching to those seeking wisdom from us as experienced Crones. We utilize effective methods to connect with ourselves and our surroundings, and we embrace spirituality as a source of resilience and empowerment. This is our fourth podcast of the year for year number 3. Yay. In 2024, as part of our third year, we'll continue to implement updates around our new theme, finding joy and honoring ourselves. Please see our website for our in-person and online classes, and don't forget to support us by subscribing to our podcast at twocronesandamicrophone.com. Today, as part of our interview with the Crones series, we're delighted to continue our discussion with Dee Golas. You'll remember Dee said that she was not sure how to describe herself, but if you listen to the first interview, podcast number 41, you'll know why she described herself as living Ocean's example to be a challenge to fix reality. Today, we want to expand on that more and follow Dee on her spiritual path, the path that Creator had in mind for her, and where this has brought her at this point in her life. Thank you, Betty. I did cut you off a little bit earlier, but
It's okay. We're used to that. So, Dee, welcome. We're really happy to have you back on this podcast. And there's so much more that you had to say. We had to do a part 2 with you. And the first thing I'd like to ask you about is Oceana. Okay, you told us about your meeting with her. And I think the question I have is you walked with her for so long and you've kept her teachings. Can you tell us what really kept you on that path and how did it put you in the direction that you're in today?
Well, there are many things that Oceana taught and shared that kept me on this path. Her humanness, her beauty, her voice. I loved her singing, but she walked her talk. She and Dee Krieger put together a foundation called Four Directions, and it was basically designed to support traditional Native American elders in whatever ways they needed supported in continuing those traditions to keep the traditions alive. So she would raise money and encourage people to kind of connect with one elder and develop a long-term relationship with them and be as supportive as they could be. And I was blessed with being able to work with one of those elders at Wounded Knee, Claudia Ironhawk, and her son Orville Sully they're now crossed into the spirit world, but we're traditional elders that really walk their talk too. And it was a beautiful thing. You basically identify what they may need and do what you can to fulfill it. So I would go once or twice a year with a borrowed trailer and fill it up with donated furniture and clothing and kids' toys and books and anything, food that could be transported and take it to Wounded Knee. And people knew I was coming and they would come the next morning and we'd pull everything out of the trailer and they'd walk off with it. So I did that for several years, and many of my friends here in Montana would accompany me as part of that support and help put in her garden and just whatever seems to be needed. Mostly she wanted transportation to traditional ceremonies, and so I provided that too and got to be blessed by being a part of that community.
So
But I think
were you able to participate in some of the ceremonies? Did they permit
oh
that?
no, I was an observer. Yeah. These
Okay.
are they involved the whole tribe of Pine Ridge pretty much, and they've been carried down for generations.
Mm-hmm.
It was a blessing just to be able to be present. Indian people have such deep-heartedness to what they put into their faith and their beliefs and each
Yeah.
other. I'm always so touched by their heart.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was crystals that really kept me mostly wanting to learn more from Oshana. And I had worked with her for 2.5 years and learned about quartz crystals and their healing and protective qualities, and how they're a manifestation of light. Actually, I have my little clear quartz one here. And they emanate negative ions and absorb positive ions, which are the more distressing and unhealthy ions that occur, and why that happens in nature, how the rain washes the positive ions out of the atmosphere, and after a sweet rain, the air is so sweet and clear because it's full of negative ions that the earth emanates. And this whole relationship to the earth is actually, crystallized literally in clear quartz crystals. And so she taught us how to clear the energy body. I called it crystal aura washes, and I did
Mm-hmm.
as many of them as anybody around me wanted. My friends were all my guinea pigs with their, um, and I kept seeing how everybody was responding to not like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. The effects of a crystal aura wash are more subtle. And
Yeah.
ocean of taught, like over the course of a year, they're still being experienced. Um, but they really make a shift. They really help clear blockages that I think people we get stuck in our thinking and in our perceptions. So crystal, it really grabbed me, and then it led me to kinesiology in the most amazing way. I have a friend who used to live north of where I am, little over 100 miles. And this was back before cell phone days. So she rarely went into town, but one day she went into town and called me and said, I need you to come up and meet this woman, a friend of hers from Arizona, who was wanting to learn how to work with crystals more traditionally rather than in the new age ways. And this friend, Jan Giesland, had a dream about what to do about that, where to learn that. And she dreamt about Mary, to call Mary. And Mary doesn't work with crystals. She was more so into plants and environments for wild ones. And Mary said, well, yeah, I happen to know somebody who's learned how to work with crystals from a native elder. And so she called me. So this meeting happened because of a dream. And so I drove up to Mary's, and Jan came in a couple hours later, and I met her. And so she said that she wanted to show me the crystals that she'd brought. And so she opened up, she had red cotton cloth, cotton barrier for them and protection. And as she was opening the bundles up and showing me these crystals, a third woman appears, or fourth woman, I guess, at this point, from even further north, to like another 80 miles further north. She had no idea whether Mary would even be home because there was no way to contact in those days if you're living out in the woods. And so the as the crystals were being exposed, Anahea pulls up, and she's had this inspiration to go see Mary. And so she sits down and we start talking about the crystals, and a little bit of what I'd learned. And when we realized that Anahea is being uncomfortable, she has this shoulder that's hurting her. And so Jan said, well, I don't know, maybe I can help you. And she got up and started pointing at her shoulder bones, her clavicle and humerus and scapula, one finger and swing a pendulum and see what the pendulum said, and another finger and swing the pendulum, and kind of assessed what Anahea's body was telling her through the electromagnetics of a pendulum that are actually reflecting Anahea's higher intelligence of what was off. It turns out that when our bones are out of alignment with each other, it throws off in a different electromagnetic charge. And that can be picked up if you can get yourself out of the way and just be a clear channel. And so she pushed on Anahea's bones here and there and gave him a massage and asked her to see if now she could move her arm. And she was able to rotate her arm for the first time in 3 years after she had slid into second base and playing baseball with her friends and bunked up her arms. Been to doctors and physical therapists, but it was the kinesiology that actually realigned the bones very gently and through nudging, essentially. And that realignment then allowed her to have the rotation. Her muscles still needed work to relocate. There was still soreness, but there wasn't the sharp pain that comes with malalignment of the bones. And so I looked at Jan and I said, well, you want to learn about crystals? I want to learn how to do that. So she moved up to Montana, and we apprenticed with each other for about a little over 2 years. And uh, it's made a huge difference in my life, the kinesiology. I use it pretty much every day on myself and my spouse and many of my friends, because it's real easy to twist an ankle, throw some toes out, elbows, shoulders, backs, hips, sacrum, and all of that is something that people who are not medically educated don't have to have any higher education at all. It's a form of people's medicine potentially, which is why I'm so passionate about it, because I think a lot of people become disabled, but they start with minor injuries. This little toe over here just keeps hurting, and so there's a little bit of a limp, and then the opposite ankle starts hurting because of that limp, and then the hip is out because of that, and it just works its way out, and before you know it, you're 55, 65, 75, and can't hardly move very well and continue to function very well. And I have a active outdoor lifestyle and I need to keep moving. And so kinesiology keeps me moving. And I love to teach people how to do it.
And I can vouch for it. I've had a treatment a couple of times with you when you've been out here, and it does work. I mean, it's different than probably what you would get from your physical therapist, a different form of kinesiology, but it absolutely does work. I don't know how it works. I've done a class with you. I still don't know how it works, but it works. So, you know, it's one of those miracle things. And yes, I do use what you taught me, the
Yeah,
blocking and using the theracane and all that other stuff. There's a lot to it, really. We could do a whole podcast on just the kinesiology. But I I would like to move on to a different topic. And
okay.
Sally, jump in here if you want to contribute to this in any way. Um, but being an Army veteran myself, I was really fascinated with all the wonderful work that you've done with veterans over the years. And if you could just address that, that would be absolutely awesome.
Well, the whole process of working with veterans was not anything I ever intended to do. Not because I didn't like veterans, but because I'm not a veteran, and I didn't think that that would qualify me to be any uh, practiced or expertise in helping veterans. But as it turned out, I kind of got drafted into being a counselor for combat veterans by a client that I had worked with him and his wife, and I was a licensed clinical social worker for 30 years. And he worked at the job service, our local town, and veterans kept coming to him and complaining that the counselor that the vet center was sending them to was kind of afraid of them once they got kind of roused up in the group, and that they really didn't respect him because of that. And I'm 77. Vietnam was my brothers, the guys in my class. Uh, I wasn't afraid of them. I loved them, and so that really helped. And it turned out it really helped being a woman, because several of them over the years would tell me it was so much easier to talk to a woman, and that helped me to stay in working with veterans because they were telling me that it made it easier to talk. But I mostly got into the same process with every veteran, and if they were married, most of them were having the same problems with their wives. And the wife was not feeling understood or heard, and that her feelings didn't matter. And I ended up seeing this consistency, which I'll address in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit about anxiety in itself, because post-traumatic stress disorder is a complex of symptoms that most people who have experienced severe trauma also experience post-trauma. It usually doesn't start until about 6 months after the trauma, as far as a diagnosis goes, but the symptoms have always been there. And anxiety is the biggest one, and you have talked about that in previous podcasts. And anxiety is the body's response to a fearful thought. So shortness of breath, rapid heart rate, tension of muscles, kind of cloudy thinking and unable to formulate clear thoughts. And the biggest thing, if you suffer from anxiety, even if it's not severe, is the most important thing is to take control of the breath, because it's the shallow, fast breathing that happens when we're in a fearful state that sets the rest of the alarm signals off in the body. Anxiety is an alarm flag. Hello, something's wrong. When you feel this, just see it as an alarm that to get your attention that something's off kilter and something is scaring you about that. You have a worry or a fear about it. And the first thing and the most powerful thing you can do is take control of the breath. And so it's so great that you guys talk about that a lot and slow it down and begin to be more mindful of when you're breathing, to keep that your breath in a relaxed state. So the first thing is basically teaching people how to help their body get into a deeply relaxed state. Because when you walk around with anxiety, you walk around with tension. And that builds up and you can have panic attacks. But it's physiologically impossible to have a panic attack if your body is in a relaxed state. Can't happen. And so cultivating deeply relaxed states as just the manner of how you walk through life, it keeps those panic attacks way off. Your thermometer has dropped. So it takes a whole lot more stimulation before you're going to be able to jump into a panic attack. It's if you're walking around deeply relaxed most of the time, just you've taken yourself there. So a lot of my work involved teaching men how to relax their bodies, and starting with increasing the tension in muscles, starting with the feet and holding them for a few seconds and then releasing them and noticing how a muscle will go into a deeper relaxed state after it's been tensed up for a few seconds. So becoming mindful of how the feet feel when they're relaxed and how they feel when they're tense, how the legs, lower and upper legs feel when they're tense and how they feel when they're relaxed. Abdomen, low back, chest, upper back, arms, hands, arms, neck, and face and scalp. And it's a deep relaxation technique that works because it's working with every muscle group of the body, and you're commanding it essentially to relax. And so learning what that feels like to be deeply relaxed, and that calms the body down. Your breath is slower and deeper, so oxygen is getting to all the organs and everybody's happy. Then you can think about, what was upsetting me? Why did I start to feel this anxiety from this relaxed state, and try to identify the source of it? Because there's always a trigger, and it could be a subtle trigger. For combat veterans, there's a lot of subtle triggers. Children crying, the smell. For our guys, it was the smell of fish oil walking past a Vietnamese restaurant, or a helicopter coming over the ridge suddenly. It's a form of stimulation. Sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. All of those avenues can trigger an anxiety reaction. And the sooner you identify that you're going into it, the sooner you can figure out the source of it and then address that. And as soon as you start addressing, because it's usually your worst fears that come up first if you have trouble with anxiety. But when you actually address it from more of a conscious state, you realize that you had enlarged, you had blown it up, kind of catastrophized what was likely to happen. And in the reality now that you're not in that trauma, is usually a whole lot easier to manage. And so the important thing, I think, is for people to realize that when you're physiologically relaxed, it's physiologically impossible to have a panic attack. Yeah. So that's one of the best things I taught. But the real thing that I kept running into was the marital issues with combat veterans and the stress that was adding to their life and here now. And the wives would be willing to come in for the most part if he invited them. So I would encourage him we get to a point where he would invite his wife to come in and talk about some of the things that break down the communication between them. And what I kept seeing over and over and over and over was the same thing. And it has to do, I think, with the way our society and other societies survive as nations at this point, before tribally, is that because women procreate and carry the babies and are not able to run after the buffalo or the elk as when they're pregnant or with children, and men are generally bigger and stronger, most societies have made men the warriors. They're the ones that need to go out and get the meat, bring it home, and which involves killing. And they're the ones that need to confront the threatening tribe or nation or whoever might be attacking, because they are bigger and stronger and have that advantage over women as far as being the warriors. So boys are born into being enculturated into warriorship, whether they like it or not, whether it's just a part of our culture because it's part of what has helped us survive. So it's not a bad thing. it's something that needs to be be made aware of, be mindful of, and to be integrated into heterosexual marriages, because women are oppressed in a number of ways, economically, sexual exploitation, different kinds of biases and myths about women, that because we menstruate in our earlier years, we're not emotionally stable. There are all these different myths. We have oppressions, yes. But what we have to look at, and especially I think women need to look at, especially in dealing with men in the military, is that men have we've been raised since boyhood to suppress their emotions because it's against human nature to kill another human being. But yet we grow them into a culture that teaches them to like guns and big tanks and airplanes dropping bombs, and so much of our toys and starts even earlier in the crib. Male babies are not as attended to when they cry as females are, studies have shown. So this enculturation into having to prepare to become a warrior one day is very subtle, but it's there, and it always includes suppression of emotion. You can't start crying if the man next to you is just suddenly shot and killed and you're in a combat situation. And mostly I worked with Vietnam combat veterans, and you have to have known how to suppress your emotions by that worst point so you can keep moving forward. And so we train men to discount their emotions, don't show your emotion, yeah. Um, and why it's so deeply insidious a type of oppression is because that teaches them that if they show emotion, they're not real men. We women, we can cry all we want and we never get accused of not being a real woman. But at least in my generation, unfortunately less so now, that more and more males are being able to be raised in households where the father doesn't slap them around for crying. You want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about, to teach them not to cry. That's how the men who went to Vietnam were raised for the most part. But fortunately, women and men are becoming much more aware that emotions are emotions. Yeah, I see them in my dogs, and certainly, so men don't learn how to identify their emotions. Their emotions generally haven't been validated by, through military training. That at that age, they're discouraged in that training. So they don't know how to validate their own feelings and talk about them and process them. And that then makes them at a risk of marital discord, because what most women want is to just know that their feelings are understandable, they're not crazy for having them. And it sure would be nice if you could validate, their feelings, that women want their feelings validated. We all do. And women do that for each other because it's always been safe for us to do that. So we have the advantage in that. And men don't, boys don't do that for each other, at least they still in general. And certainly not men in general doing that for each other. They still talk about manly things for the most part. And so I really want women who are married to warriors, especially, to understand that they're handicapped that way. That's a handicap. They don't know how to listen and be supportive emotionally because they haven't experienced it a whole lot themselves, and so they don't know how to give it. And so we need to be patient and just demonstrate that for them. This is so what I ended up teaching. One of the most valuable things I taught was emotionally supportive listening, teaching men the part of resolving conflict conversations that they consistently miss, that then causes the women to feel invalidated and not understood and maybe not respected. And so I thought I was going to work with women, and I ended up working mostly with men, which is the greatest honor of my life, to serve those who serve. And that took me back around to working with their wives and their children and family.
Oh,
And
Dee, that's absolutely wonderful. I mean, having been there, I understand that. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of nurses that have learned to suppress their emotions because you cannot, you just can't show it to the patients, right? It's a big, big problem in
yeah.
the healthcare industry, but that's another conversation for another day. We are almost out of time. I can't believe it.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
I,
Sally, go ahead.
I know and I was going to ask you actually, Dee, one of the things I know that you've done is you worked with Oshana to get permission to modify some of the ceremonies that she taught us to use with the veterans, resolution of relationship ceremonies
Hmm.
and how to use the fire to release some of the griefs and other emotions that are kind of ruling to work on that, resolve those things and release things into the fire. And I don't know, maybe that's a discussion that we can have at another time because I was going to say, could you talk a little bit about that? But I hear Betty saying, oh my gosh, we're almost out of time.
We are.
But but I do know that you had an amazing wisdom practice
Hmm.
that you talked with us about before we started this recording about managing anxiety. And even though you used it in your practice mostly with the veterans, it's a strategy that I think is amazing and a wisdom practice for everybody. Do we have, yeah, I think we have time to do that, don't we, Betty?
No, actually, we're out of time. We're a little bit over, but it's okay. I know we were going to talk about tapping and EFT. So I would recommend anybody who wants to know more about that. Sally's done a whole course on it. And if they go to the Minerva website, which is minervaed.com, minervaed.com, it's an amazing course. I must tell you, I use tapping myself and it absolutely works. So I would refer our listeners to that to take a really good look at that because I know Dee, you said that was extremely effective.
yes,
Um,
I taught how to help get a grip on your body.
yes, yeah,
I
yeah.
used it as taught guys how to do it wherever they were. If they got a panic
Hmm.
attack in the store, they can go in the men's room and tap and get a grip. Yes,
Yes, very, very,
powerful.
very important.
Right.
So, is there a wisdom practice that you would like to recommend to our listeners? Anything in particular?
Yes, that being mindful of our breath. In order to maintain a relaxed state, we have to kind of monitor our breathing. And I used to cut off a little corner of a child's sticker, a fluorescent type sticker, and ask a man where I could put it on his watch. And so that he would have a reminder every time he saw that sticker to stop and take 12 deep breaths and kind of notice how he's breathing. His
Great.
anxiety tends to build throughout the day, and that helps bring it back down. So, yeah, mindfulness of breath.
That's awesome. It really is
I like
awesome.
I like the idea of the sticker. And a lot of people don't wear watches right now, but
Right.
putting a little sticker on your cell phone because people are always glancing at their phones.
Hmm.
Putting a
Right.
little sticker like in the corner of your cell phone
That would
would
work.
sort of do the same thing, or even a little sticker in the corner of your rear view mirror or,
Right.
on your mirror in the house to kind of stop you and go, time to take a breath and check in on where you're going. would be another way of translating that if you don't wear a watch anymore.
I just had this vision of having stickers all over the house, whatever room you went into, there was a sticker. So
But no, then they would lose their effect.
that's right. Uh, okay, well, Sally, would you like to end this podcast? Bring us to a closure here. This
Okay.
has been wonderful, really, Dee. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Thank you, Dee. And you know what? I think we might just have to have you back again in the future because there's still so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
But we do appreciate your joining us today. And for those of you who are tuning in to our podcast, thank you. We really appreciate it. Kindly spread the word. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions about the subject. There may be things that, when you listen to this, that Dee has mentioned that really bring some things up for you, particularly if you're a Vietnam vet or if you're somebody who's in relationship with somebody who is a Vietnam vet or Iraqi freedom or Afghanistan. We could go on to the conflicts that we've had since then. Reach out, ask us questions. We'd be more than happy to answer them, bring them into the next podcast. Feel free to leave a rating or share this episode with family and friends. Subscribe to our podcast on your podcast provider. We would love for you to leave a review on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn to tell us what you find most memorable about this episode. I myself can think of a couple things I would dial in and mention. We aim to give you ways to be kind to yourself and others. And many thanks to minervaed.com and Franny's Photography for sponsoring our podcast, and Dee for you joining us on this podcast.
Thank you so much. It's good to see your faces.
And as Linda would say if she was here, which obviously she's not here today, go outside and find your glimmer. And I find myself doing that a lot. It's really very, very helpful. Remember, we're here to help you navigate the muddy waters of our time.
Aho.
Aho, aho.
Walk in beauty. Kadishte.
Kadishte.
And remember, all is made beautiful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.